Residents of Middlesex County awoke to one of the worst natural disasters in the region's history. By the night of Saturday, June 5th, the state had been hit by 7 to 12 inches of rain over a 24-hour period. A large low-pressure system that stalled off the coast of the Delmarva Peninsula brought Connecticut the classic 100-year storm, with precipitation that surpassed any previous storm not associated with a hurricane or tropical storm. Essex was the hardest hit community. Official records show the town received 10.65 inches of rain in 24 hours and 14 inches in a 72-hour period. Chester sustained more than $1 million in damage from flooding of the Pataconk Brook, which runs right through the downtown village. 5 town bridges and 4 state bridges were washed away. From the Hartford Courant.
All right. So every memory I have of the flood of '82 is secondhand. And I hardly believe what I saw in the pictures until I experienced what I did back in 2018 and was told basically that was mild compared to some of this. If you've been to one of these programs before, they kind of lead themselves. We've got a series of photos that were donated to us and what we found, and we'll be going through a slideshow. And anybody that sees something they want to speak, raise their hand, get a microphone, and join in. So with that said, we'll start with one of our first images. Probably seen this one a few times in our social media posts. Kind of a look down North Main Street, down towards Fort Water Street, all the debris and everything in the road there. We've got another picture, kind of this. Oh, go ahead.
Well, do you want us to comment on the picture?
Sure. Go ahead.
So the White House
Turn the microphone.
So the White House on the left was my mother and father's, and it was pretty. The house had no damage, but the yard was completely a mess. There were large containers in the yards, things that came down for vases. But the damage went through and around. My parents had a pond on the other side of the house, and that was completely filled in. Our son, reminds me that there were bulldozers there most of the summer, cleaning up and getting things out of the way. A lot of stuff in vases, as I said. There is a garage there that has an apartment, a red barn, and my grandmother at the time lived there. And the fire department had to come and get her out using a chair and getting her out in a great big tall truck. I mean, she was in her late 80s at the time. And I guess they brought her to the Chesterfield, or probably the firehouse first, and then to Chesterfield, until she could get back into the apartment. Those are my memories of that scene.
Anybody else want to comment before we move on to the next photo? Okay. Next photo shows kind of a similar close-up shot of the same area. You can see all the debris, boulders and rocks and things in the road. Anybody have anything to? Okay. Go on to the next photo. This one, you'll recognize a few familiar faces in there. I'm sure somebody can recognize the gentleman with the tall boots and the white hair standing there.
Say who it is.
That's Edmund Delaney. Does anybody recognize anybody else in that picture? Obviously, this would be before my time, so. But I do remember Bonfani Real Estate used to be there in the One Maple Street building. So can't really tell exactly what these people are looking at, but they're all looking at something that.
For those of us that weren't here, and not because I wasn't born, I was. Can you back up? Where did this flooding come from? What rivers? What broke? What happened? I'm not familiar with that.
Great Brook.
Somebody with a little more.
Great Brook. This is mostly from Great Brook, the Packhouse also, but I think Great Brook did more damage. Yeah, about, it's Great Brook, I think, did the most damage down there. Packhouse, I can't remember what the Packhouse did,
A lot, yeah.
but the Great Brook's what you saw before, that's Great Brook coming down by the Northern Terrace Theater. That's the bridge that was wiped out. I can't remember if it was the water main there, just asked my vice president, because I thought he had a better memory than me. And maybe that water main was
So,
intact, I can't remember.
so I think if we had like maybe like a timeline, I think is what people are asking for. I think Martin's got the answer here, kind of how things played out.
Good afternoon, everybody. Martin Heft. So, kind of, if my memory recollection is correct, we had multiple days of rain prior to this weekend storm that came in on Saturday night. I don't remember the actual specific date before, but there was multiple days of heavy downpouring rain that happened. That was really the cause of all the flooding. That everything, Chester was very lucky because our dams didn't break, surprisingly, of how many dams, Jennings Pond did not, yes.
No, they had a dam break, because that's what took my house out in town, on Main Street. The dam came through that bridge and hit my house, and moved the whole foundation, 40
Oh,
feet
okay.
down. Yeah, okay.
Well, the majority of our dams did not break. Surprisingly, we had the water flow went over them, but our dams did not let go, as like Central Essex, where the dams actually all released.
We didn't have a dam failure.
No, I didn't think we had a dam failure
We didn't
in
have a
Chester
dam
at
failure.
all.
It was all Brook, going over the dams, we did
Correct.
not have a dam failure in Chester.
But we lost bridges.
Yeah.
Correct, we lost bridges, we lost roads, everything, but we did not have a dam that broke, which Chester was very fortunate out of the 20 or so dams that we actually have in town for that. But the water that came over was what the damage actually did on for everything that came through those, that overnight.
Where is that?
So this photo here is on North Main Street. Behind the photo where all the people are standing, there is a dam behind there that you can see is still in place. But so much water must have been spilling over it that it went around the bridge that was there and washed out part of the road. That's kind of what they were talking about, how there was just so much water there wasn't anywhere else for it to go but over and around. And you can see a significant amount of the roadway was taken out there. But it appears that the bridge was actually still standing.
Yeah, and that, I'm sorry, that was actually true on most of the bridges, was, as Bob mentioned, is the culverts couldn't take the water, so it eroded all around the bridges, especially, I remember the one down on Water Street, you had the bank parking lot at that time, the drive up was just all stone and everything else, because the bridges were all there, but everything eroded around them just because the water couldn't get through, so it kept eroding around both sides of it, as you see in the picture here.
Martin, what about the reservoir dam? Was that just, because Deep Hollow was pretty wet.
I do have some photos of that a little later in the slideshow.
Because I know that got rebuilt. Several of our dams did get.
Correct, yeah, I know, like Jennings, dam did get rebuilt and everything, it didn't fail, but there was work done after that, at Jennings, after the flood. I know that one.
Bases, that got redone.
Some of them got, redone, but I don't recall a dam breaking, where
I was
it's.
just wondering about the reservoir because.
No, can I interject here? Being water company employee, retiree, worked that night,
Perfect.
that neither dam, we were very concerned about the Deep Hollow Reservoir Dam, which is the one before he was 7. I spent, I think, 27 hours up there on watch after, which was pretty easy because the water was receding. There were a lot of Bloody Marys and picnicking going on. But and then the one in the Apollo, that was fine too. The water came close. In fact, the Deep Hollow Deuces Dam, the water coming over there caused so much turbulence that underneath the dam there was a huge, which became my swimming pool for that summer. And until we had to come in with a big crane and everything and put a big surge stone in there. And then the dam above, the Deep Hollow Reservoir Dam, that was one we were very concerned about. And that's all stone face. So now, shortly after that, we did all the wing walls there and put actually concrete steps below there so it would not get undermined. But they all held. They were close, but they held. And good, because my house wouldn't be here if they didn't.
Okay, similar area, different angle, kind of get an idea of what the damage was in that area. Took the corner of the roadway out, you can see part of the bridge fell down, but the bridge is actually still standing. I've got in the next photo, there's another shot of a little bit further down North Main Street. Most of these photos seem to be in this area. It almost, can't quite tell, but it almost looks like that pickup truck is stuck in the mud there, the silt built up around it. If you're familiar, this is a little further down North Main Street, the House of the Columns. We're going to jump ahead one photo here, and this one here will give you a true idea of what the devastation was behind the Bates factory at the time, now the Norman Terrace Theater. Obviously looked a little bit different back then, but just all sorts of pieces of rocks and I'm not familiar with that factory. Does anybody know what it was used for at that time? Was it abandoned already, or?
I think that was abandoned.
I believe it was empty at that time.
All right. I've got a few more of the same kind of area here in the theme. Somebody was talking about bulldozers. Were there most of the summer. This photo here was probably taken in the weeks after the flood as they're repairing the road. There you can see the dog house in the background, North Main Street. I've got one more photo here of the Archibald's barn. Just see quite a field of all sorts of riprap and stuff that was washed out of the stream.
That's where the pond is.
Okay, so was the pond
That's where the pond
was the pond full of all this
Yeah.
rock
They
debris?
emptied it.
Yeah. This is another photo from Paul of just basically showing North Main Street. Seems to be a lot of photos of this area. Thinking it was probably one of the harder hit areas, everything. But coming up, the next photo we have here is pretty interesting. Those of you who remember the chart house, I don't know exactly when these photos were taken, but whoever was taking them was taking a little bit of a risk there.
It was the next day, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, it had to be the next day.
And it,
And
Well,
were you taking a risk?
I can tell that photo, but I looked at it right there, right before the bridge there. I mean, I'm going back 40 years, I just know they were my pictures, I don't really remember that much of being there. But I think I probably was supposed to be at dam duty at this time, but it got boring, so we went for a ride.
see if the chart house was open for a drink, but they weren't.
We made Iverton that day.
Yeah. I recall seeing photos from 2018 of water. They were standing inside the restaurant and water was up outside the windows. So I can't imagine what this was like. It looks like it knocked half of the wheelhouse off the side there. Paul was talking a little bit before about some of the dams and spillways that were reconstructed. The next photo that we have, if you could explain, I think it's a before and after.
Yeah, that's, the one to the left is when we were on our dam duty. That's my buddy Ed, Sarah's friend too. Yep, down there in the yellow raincoat. It's below the falls, but the water was well receded this time. Then the other photo is the spillway and all the walls that we constructed probably the next year or two. And those steps down below, just the water will come there and it won't erode. That's how you lose a dam, you develop a hole down there, then everything falls in. Either that or it goes around the side, hits the earth and erodes that way, then you lose your whole spillway.
So the damage wasn't always isolated down towards the center area. The next slide shows a few images out in the western end of town. Now, the image on the right is pretty obvious that you can see the flagpole and Cedar Lake behind it. So that's a stretch of 148 there. But I'm not sure the photo on the left, I believe, is 148, somewhere just prior to Wade Hill, going up the hill there, but not positive if somebody knows exactly where that is. I think it's past Charlene's.
That's Kate Porter's old house.
Yeah. And the water was over the road at Cedar Lake. You know, there's the whole Cedar Swamp that allowed the water to have a place to go. So that's why, I mean, Wig Hill, our dam on Wig Hill, you know, we didn't have the problem that others did because the water spread out.
It still took out a portion of the
Yeah, it did.
road there.
Yep. Where I think it was more confined in those areas.
Okay.
I just remember Kate Porter's house because my husband Ken and Ed Castelli were working in New Haven, and that morning, when they tried to get home, because they printed the paper for the morning paper, and it took them 2.5 hours just to get to my house because they couldn't make it up through 145. They had to turn around, go back to Route 81. They got up part way, came down 148, couldn't get through 148, went back up to 81, couldn't do that, so they ended up going back down to 95 and going up 91 and going into Middletown and trying to come down the back way. And they finally got to my house, and then Ed couldn't get home. He had to go all the way back up Cedar Lake Road over Jailhouse and down Route 1 to get to his house. So we went down to check out the bridge, but we couldn't get there because of the water over 148.
I've heard a lot of stories secondhand from people that were, because it happened on Saturday night, people were out of town and trying to get back to town and not finding a way, and sometimes there was a way, but they weren't sure if it was safe or not, so they ended up having to wait until the next morning. I just recall a story from my Aunt Bella and Uncle Frank that they were coming home from West Hartford from their in-laws, and they finally decided to go up to John Winthrop, and they slept in their car overnight and waited for the sun to come up so they could see where they were and try to figure out how to get back to their house on Pleasant Street. So all sorts of. Oh, go ahead. I need a microphone.
I was working at Whalen Engineering, and so I had to leave from Hoopla Hill, go up over Southwick, go all the way around and come out back by the Hubbards to get over to Whalen Engineering. Because that's the only way I could go because of the other, all that was washed out.
So the wooden bridge by your house survived the
Right
flood?
there.
It survived.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it was funny because a lot of people that were living in Deep River had no clue how to get from Deep River to Whalen Engineering. Even though they lived here their whole life, they had no clue how to do the roundabout. Yeah, it was kind of funny. What's that?
They only make one way.
Well, you,
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
you were talking about stories of where people were. We were at Carrie Hall's house that night. She at the time lived in, who owns the house
The
now?
Castelli.
Oh, it was the Castelli home. And if any of you know who my mother was, she was not a, interfering mother-in-law, was she? But we were there, and we were at Carrie's, and we get a phone call. And she said, she knew that we were going there for dinner. And she said, I think you ought to go home. The streams are going like crazy. And of course, if you see North Main Street, you see what was happening there. And we ended up going home over Wig Hill, and we must have just gotten through before the road went out on Liberty Street. And it was just, and we went home, our children were in bed and don't have memories of that night, but we spent the night in the basement with no clothes on, up to our chests in water. It just came right in. The water table was so horrific that it just, entered our basement.
Yeah, I know our basement flooded in 2018, and I asked Bruce Watrous, who used to live in our house, and so when was did your basement ever flood? When was the last time? He goes, no, 82 was the last time it flooded. Go on to the next, yep. So, a lot of photos of North Main Street. You can see the town at the time was starting to clear all the debris and everything there. You can see it's stacked up 2-3 feet on each side, just to try to make the road passable. We've got another photo here of down at the end of North Main Street, Water Street. Kind of muddy there. The next series of photos here are of down behind the Pataconic, behind kind of where the wheat market is today, Simons. You can see, this doesn't look too bad, but there's a lot of water there. If we jump to the next one before we take comments, questions, you can see here that the whole back end of the Pataconic is essentially falling off. I don't recall hearing too much about that other than, a few secondhand things.
I live on the other side, so I can see the Patacon from behind my house. But that's where the bar was at the time, and the cash register was, the cash bag was still hanging on the inside, so when no one could get to it because, at the end of the night, everyone ran and somebody forgot to grab the bag. But Greg actually had a construction business, and he actually had his guys out, and they shored up my house because I had lost the foundation. Because I thought until now that the dam broke, but apparently the bridge was too small to handle all the pressure of the water, and that was what made it so fast down there, as it concentrated in. So it bulleted my house and then came back over.
Does everyone know where your house is?
1 Main Street, right at the bridge. So I lost the entire foundation from front to back and 10 feet of the basement floor. And so my house was in trouble, and Greg sent his crew over with 2x4s, and they shored it up. And then he was a lot younger than me. Anyway, He got up on the actual back of the Patacon with a chainsaw, and I had a picture. I don't know what happened to it. Because you have to remember, we didn't have cell phones, so we had those really crummy pictures. And honestly, we were trying to save our house, so nobody was out there taking pictures. It really was like, we were really fighting for our property. But Greg cut the building off, and we watched it drop into the river.
So is this a photo after it was
I
cut?
believe it is. It looks like it had completely fallen off now, right?
Yeah, it looks like you can see part of the floor kind of in there at an angle.
It was,
He cut it off because he didn't want any of his guys up there.
it was really an extremely sorrowful moment in town, because where the bar was, it absolutely disappeared. Fell into the brook, remember? Literally, the bar was stuck out over the roof. And it literally just fell right off, and that was probably the worst thing that could have happened to Chester.
You go to the next slide, I have a color photo of the same
Yeah.
area. Same shot. So it was kind of, the bar was kind of cantilevered out.
Bar stood right out over the brook.
There was a foundation under it.
No.
No, it was on posts.
Post.
That was on posts.
Hi, I'm Cindy Ott, and my family lived on Kings Highway. I was in the process of buying my grandparents' house. It was on the corner of Kings Highway and Goose Hill. And before we bought it, we rented for 1 month the house on Water Street that is no longer there. There were 2 houses where the little bank is now. The gray one. So it had rained for a couple of days. We knew the water was rising. Oh, everything's gonna be okay. There were 3 stairs to get into our house. We were finally notified that somewhere over behind Fiddlers or behind the Patacon, a propane tank was breaking loose. So better get out of there. So my daughter was 8 months old. I grabbed her diaper bag, went up to my parents' house, which was at 8 Kings Highway. So to get there, my dad's driveway went over the brook. So we got dropped off there. Julie and I got dropped off there. My husband left to go back to secure the apartment. We had minimal furnishings that was all stored in my grandparents' house. Right after he left, my dad's driveway washed out. The water coming down from Waterhouse Brook came over Goose Hill. It diverted when the concrete and stone wall came down. It diverted the water behind my grandparents' house, but it did wash out my dad's driveway. So I think it was 3 days before we could get back into the apartment to get our things. And at the same time, I was working at the George Abbott Company, which was the mill building just before Cuneo's Garage. And as Mrs. Huff said, I had to go to Deep River. It took me about 20 minutes to get from Kings Highway to work at the Abbott Company to come down Bochum Road, because I saw a picture somewhere just before the Abbott driveway was all washed out. And there were so many little culverts in town and streams that we never realized existed until this flood.
Thank you. Go ahead, Martin.
After the presentation, my scrapbook's on the side because that's one of my pictures. I actually have pictures of them rebuilding this in the scrapbook as well. So if anyone wants to take a look at it, you can start seeing them putting the cement foundation back in and rebuilding the back of the Patacon.
Right, next. There's the suspicious propane tank that was about ready to break loose. Similar thing happened in 2018. My brother-in-law lives on top of the River Tavern, and got a knock on his door from the fire department that night. Had to evacuate because of the same thing. The propane tanks were breaking loose.
That was a big deal. That was a big deal, that propane. The fire department had rowboats out there, and the junior firemen were out there, and that propane tank was a very big concern.
The whole center of town was evacuated.
Yeah, because if that had broken loose and let out propane, that would not be a good situation.
A lot more people smoked at that time too.
Oh, yeah. Next photo we've got here. All sorts of different debris and garbage and stuff. This is down, you're kind of looking back towards the wheat market and the, yeah, right behind it. So I don't know what all this stuff is. If it's stuff that fell. You know, there's a case of Northern Light there. There's a refrigerator. There's a bicycle. There's, you know.
When I was able to get back to the, when I was able to get back to the house, it was still filled with water to the ceiling. And I could see fish swimming inside my building. And then I went over and daylight was coming from 10 feet into the building where the foundation was gone. And I had everything stored down there because I didn't know I bought a house in the middle of the, what am I, the deep water dock that used to be, where the ships came in. Yeah, someone failed to mention that Roy Monty when he sold me the house. But not that I'm holding a grudge. Anyway, it's kind of an interesting story, but yeah, so I am at the water line, which you were saying. So when the water comes in, and when it goes out, it goes out. So pumping, nothing helps. You just have to wait. I didn't know that either, but anyway, everything of mine went south, and we had a sailboat. I find pieces of it down in the backyard, whatever. So I'm gonna out myself because I'm now in my 60s and it's okay. But so my boyfriend and I at the time, we thought we were gonna be pot farmers when we grew up. So we saved all our seeds and we found a big jar that was broken. And about a month later, they were growing all around Christmas. And the sediment had just gone over the top and it germinated them. And so Ray would die if he knew that these were over here. So we just had a good laugh. I think I told him about 5 years ago. But anyway, we had a good laugh. Shelley did. Anyway, and then we had to rebuild the whole foundation. We had to sandbag it out. We had to jack it up. I was condemned because the house started to settle and I wouldn't leave, and then the police came and took me out because I'm stubborn. And you couldn't close the bathroom door anymore on the 3rd floor because it started to settle. So Fran Mulcarney was my mason, and he sandbagged, we sandbagged the water out, and he sat in there and he built the stone wall the whole, like, I think like 3 months or so. We were all having, we were in the hip waders. Drank a lot of Bud. Charlene was there. They were all in back because they had the store there. And Greg lent me his dump truck, and I took a stone wall down of my dad's and brought it and dumped it in the backyard. And then I was Fran's mason, so mason's helper. So I brought him concrete and stones, and he just sat in there. And one day we jacked it up with 2 hydraulic jacks. And he goes, okay, we're gonna go, and actually sat in there just like it would be a tire and watched the house stand straight back up again. So it was like looming over us, and it stood right up, and then he filled in the rest. And we built it up 2 feet higher than what it was, but that doesn't stop the water because it comes in with the tide. So all the things you think you're doing don't really change anything. Anyway, that's all I got.
Next, I've got one more photo here, a little higher res color photo of North Main Street, all the debris and everything there. The next photo is a prime example of bridge on Liberty Street, kind of what happened. The bridge was still there, but the water had nowhere else to go, so it went around it. Very similar thing happened in the same spot back in 2018. So, not quite to this extent. But, you know, things don't change. The next photo is just a close-up of the same area, where the water's still running pretty good. There. I've got another photo here of, this is off of 148 behind the Abbott Company, I believe. I've got another photo of the same similar area here.
So, I have something to say about that. Nancy Penny isn't here, but she was working at the chart house that night, and they closed early, and she and her brother and sister went into the brook. The bridge had just given way, the car went in. Nobody was hurt, but
Wow. In this area?
yes, I imagine it's that area. It was right by the Abbott Company.
So that bridge at the intersection of Boken Road was washed away.
Yeah.
That would definitely make navigating between the west end and east end of town challenging. I can understand that people that have had to go around the Deep River to get from one end to the other. I've got another photo, North Main area. The town crew got creative with their barricades, using a few 55-gallon drums there. I've got another photo here of, I believe, the west. I think this is the west end of town, or is this?
That's the bridge.
Is that the bridge by the Abbott Company?
Yeah.
Okay. Some of the landmarks have changed a little bit, so it's tough to tell exactly where they are. But similar situation. The bridge is actually still there, but the water went around it. And then I've got one last photo here of somebody's car with a bunch of debris in the middle of the road there down Water Street. Does anybody know whose car that might be? You can make out a corner of the fire truck.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Herbery's down on the right,
Yep.
just to give you, because that bridge went out as well.
Is that in the arch?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right in the corner, yes.
Marty, will you tell your story about the Boy Scout that was in the
Sure.
paper?
Sure, so as we're talking about bridges here, so that weekend I happened to be camping with Boy Scout Troop 13 out at Camp Tatman and Basra up over near Norwich, which doesn't mean, we always go out in the rain and go camping, so it's like, even though it had been raining, I don't remember if we were there for what the camp out was or anything else, but basically Saturday night came and they told us, it's like, okay, everyone's gotta go home, and they sent us all home in the middle of all this rain. So I was driving my mom's Chrysler Cordoba, big huge white car, and came down through all the back ways, Route 82 from Norwich area all the way through, heading across East Haddam Bridge. I was coming down because I was bringing Bill Scudder home, who lived down the street, down Water Street here, on it from camping. And coming down just as we're getting to the Chester line, coming down Route 154, all of a sudden I got to the road, all of a sudden it was like the road ended. I mean, literally the whole hillside came down and just moved across Route 154, but it looked so natural because you could see all the green grass, everything. I mean, it was just a perfect thing. And everything just slid down and it just blocked. So turned ourselves around, went up Route 82, exit 7, and this, come to find out the next day, of course, all that washed out and everything else on this, and probably if I would have been an hour later, I may have been one of those cars in the ditch, because everything had washed out. Tried to get Mill back into the center of town, because once I got back off the highway, I couldn't get down into the center of town. You know, actually went through around the corners, just before, Cunio's Garage, all these bridges that we've talked about, went over all of them, but of course water's pouring over them, I just went through it. What did I know? I was 17 years old, I just drove. And I had a good car, so I just, right there, they didn't even know I was on my way home, because we didn't have cell phones to call or say I was on my way home. Finally, I get down closer to like public library, everything's blocked off. Mill's worried about where's his, family, everything else, and they're like, oh, you're gonna have to bring him up to the firehouse. So I dropped him off at the firehouse, drove back home, back over again, all these bridges I washed out, the next day, or later that evening, got to the bottom of Hoop Hole Hill. I remember going up the road, and it's like, well, this is really odd. I'm going through like a foot of water, 2 feet of water at the bottom of Hoop Hole Hill Road. And not really thinking about it, got home, walked in, of course my parents were like surprised to see me, telling me the whole story, everything else. Well, the next morning we come down and we can see from the brook, the water had just been pouring over, because you could see the ramp coming up over Route 9 of how it all eroded, all the water just pushing there, of how much water was over the road, and then of course realizing every single bridge, had washed out that I had driven over that night.
Sounds like quite the adventure. This is the last photo that I have in the series. So does anybody have anything else that they'd like to contribute that maybe doesn't pertain to
It was the most terrifying night of my life, to date, really. And my mother-in-law lived on High Street. I live on Baker Road, so past Hoop Hill, past the chart house. And we were having dinner at her place on High Street, and we kept saying, we need to come home, it's getting worse. And she said, oh, let's see if it lets up a little bit. So the longer we stayed, the worse it got. And finally, at one point, I think around 11 o'clock at night, maybe at 40 years, I don't remember the time frame, but we left. And I don't think I'm exaggerating to say it took us about 2 hours to get home from High Street to Baker Road. And at the time, my husband was very adventurous, and he was having a ball. He was loving this. And I had a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old in the backseat of the car with me, terrified. And when we came out of High Street and went on 148, I think our first attempt, well, this before all the crews got there, before any emergency people were there. Roads were literally breaking in front of us. We were watching this action happen, so we couldn't tell it was washed out yet. I remember he took a left-hand turn onto Straits. I think that's where one of the little bridges were. And you couldn't see it was all water. And he was going to go over it. And I think I screamed. I said, the kids, you can't do that. What's wrong with you? And so we backed up. And 148 was broken in so many places on the way home. It was impossible. And I think, again, we did the route of South Wig and went up Turkey Hill and back down. But no exaggeration to say, I think my memory serves me correct. It took 2 hours to get home. And I was crying, and it was really a terrifying night. So that's my experience.
We were in that same boat. My grandmother had taken my mother, my brother, and myself to New York City for the day. So we'd gone to Middletown, taken a bus into the city, and whatever we did in the city, and came back. So I have a child's memory of that. I don't remember being terrified. I remember, coming down the hill by the fairgrounds to Cozy Castle. I remember seeing frogs in the headlights jumping. Kids think that's so cool. But we had dropped, my grandmother lived in Higginham, and we came back down Old Route 9. And we normally would have taken the 82 connector and gone that way. For some reason we didn't, and we had the same feeling. We made it home, no problem. My mother was physically ill the next day when she saw all the streets that we had been over, we could have been, in the ditch, in the dirt, and just, the timing was just kind of incredible, because we'd been through all those back streets. I remember, we usually would have gone down 82, but we ended up coming all the way through the center of town. I don't know, maybe that was already blocked off already, but, it was incredible. And then we got up the next day, did the tour of the town, and just, she couldn't even look at it. She was so upset realizing that we had been minutes, hours, I don't remember what the time frame would have been, but, and then we went down to Iverton and saw that, just the destruction down there where the dam had let go, and just incredible, you know, but from a kid's perspective, you don't really remember, but you remember those weird kind of.
Thank you.
Just one other comment. You have to remember, this was at night. The storm was still raging, it was still raining, and nobody knew what was happening. And the fact that it was dark, and you couldn't see anything, and you couldn't see the road broken, so you started crawling in the car, basically, and water was over bridges. And so I think that the fact that it was happened at nighttime, and it was still raining hard, so the visibility was bad. So that was a factor that made it very difficult if you were on the road that night.
There was really no warning. There was no breaking news. There was no, the weather people had not, no one had predicted that we were going to have this. And it happened so quickly. Yes, it was raining, but then all of a sudden, all these brooks started raging. It just happened so suddenly. And it happened to the whole area, from over in Salem, 8 Mile, all the way to where? Killingworth, certainly. Madison, all those towns that have hills and dams.
I'll tell a quick story how I got home. I was actually in Denmark Drive visiting a female friend, and Dan Zanardi called me again. No cell phones, called on a landline. Paul, what are you doing? I said, I'm watching TV. What's raining out? I said, oh, I'm watching TV. Well, they evacuated your road. And so everyone off Deep Hollow was evacuated. Well, I wanted to get home. So I called my friend Ed down in the center, and he and Danny hooked up. Ed, apparently, the water by Cozy Corner, by Moravellas there, was over the road. And Ed, he had a big truck, big tires, he just drove through it, taking a risk. The water wasn't running hard, they were just meandering. So he went through that, picked me up. We couldn't get up to Deep Hollow. Somehow we got out there, and they had a road blocked off right by the beginning. And I'm thinking, well, let's go rope over and we'll pull ourselves over, which was ridiculous. We came to our senses. We drove up to Goose Hill, up to the water treatment plant. Drove out back, and there's the old gravel road that carries the raw water main through over around Snake Ledge. We walked down that, and it was like a river going down there. Danny and I, and Danny's a big guy, and Ed and I. And Ed told me today, I called him, because I remember when we got down by Lean Ferrari, we were walking through water up to our bellies. And by the time we got home, Lenny Davis would not leave his house. They tried to evacuate him. He and Margaret stayed there. Danny was so tired, he hit the couch, and we never talked to him for another 24 hours. He was down. Ed and I went with Lenny Davis, and he had a pump, and we pumped out the 3 houses back and forth. We pumped the basement up, they fill up, go to the next house. We drank every bit of beer and hard liquor in all 3 houses.
God, that's hard to believe.
Yeah, Danny woke up in the morning, Ed and I the phone lines weren't down. We got called in by the water company to go to work. We had no vehicle out there, but we walked down. I remember finding a 2x6 that we used as a bridge to get across all these washouts. Get down, get Danny's, we went down to work. That's when we went to work for the water company, and spent, I think, 27 hours up on dam duty, which got boring, and that's when we went for a ride. I took some pictures on Iverton. We had the truck and going down Comstock Ave. Well, we were supposed to be up giving reservoir levels, which we were still giving over the radio, We were giving levels, and the road on Comstock Ave just gave out, and the whole truck just dropped like 3 feet. Wouldn't have been good. So I just slowly put a 4-wheel drive and backed out. I said, okay, party's over, let's go back to our dam duty.
So was there any bridge washouts on Deep Hollow, or?
No. The water was going over, and there was nothing washed out that I remember. No, I think they redid the one at the beginning one time, but it was not washed out. To my knowledge.
Being a dead end road, that would be difficult. Anybody have? Oh, go ahead.
Well, to show the tragedies that could occur, We had a basketball team, several members, in fact, Ed Meehan was a member of our team too. And we played in leagues throughout the area. And we made the Patacon car home base. In fact, we spent so many times at the Patacon that they eventually sponsored, and to bring things together, you can see one of our t-shirts down at the exhibit on restaurants. A colorful yellow and blue with a big beer mug in the middle of it. And so when the flood occurred, we had the double tragedy of we lost our favorite bar and we lost our sponsor as well.
Quite a disappointment. Go ahead, Marta.
All right, it's a two-part question. If geography is destiny, preponderance of a lot of streams in our town, can you compare it, maybe Martin and Bob here, with what happened to other towns? How bad was our destruction? That's the first part of the question. And the second is, again, if geography is destiny, was there any plan to try to, figure out how to ameliorate extreme flooding conditions for our town that resulted?
So I think, because we didn't have the dams break, we didn't have, we had different destruction than, like, say, Essex, with the dam breaking out by Ponds, the old, Ponds factory, or everything else down in Iverton section there, where that went and it, took houses out. I mean, it literally moved houses, the amount of water, everything. We didn't have that. Our bridges all went out. We probably got hit the hardest with all of our bridges out. I mean, as everyone's talked about, you couldn't get from Route 9 to center town, and every single bridge along Route 148 was out. And if you went up over Wig Hill, you had to only go one lane because half the side of Wig Hill washed out, coming down the back hillside. Whereas, Iverton, very hard hit, you saw pictures of the houses, everything, especially in the Iverton section, that just got moved right off foundations, everything else. So different types of destruction for that, and I think that's because the dam broke on that. Chester's very fortunate, though, most people may not know this, our dams don't have water behind them. They're land behind most of our dams. Because they are so old, they've all silted in. So we don't have Jennings Pond different, Jennings Pond is holding water back. But a lot of our dams, majority of them, have dirt behind them. So if they were to let go, it's dirt coming down, not water. So there's a difference there on that. But that's, the difference with the geography and the difference of the devastation.
But we had more bridges.
We had more bridges out than other
Because
places.
we had more streams.
Correct.
I mean,
Being
in
an old
general.
mill town,
Yeah.
correct, right.
All right.
Yeah, and as for making improvements and things like that, I believe they are, as any building that's modified, construction, anything nowadays, of course, has to go through FEMA regulations if it's in a certain area. And as bridges are being replaced and dams are being rebuilt, everything's being brought up to code, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it can't happen again. So.
And we actually saw that with the 18 flood. So the same bridges had the same problems.
Were you warned?
Right.
Did you have a warning?
Yes, but it was at the last minute. They sent the phone alerts out in 2018.
Because we had phones.
Because we have cell phones now. We didn't have that in 82. So if you didn't have the TV on and they weren't covering local news,
right.
you didn't know.
Marta just mentioned geography, and I'm reminded of the very early settlers of this area, the Wangunk Indians. And they used to summer over at Fort Hill, just left of the ferry slip, and winter right up by Cedar Lake. They were very nomadic. Most Indian tribes were. They pick up their belongings, head west for the winter. They did not go 148, or what would be 148 now. There weren't bridges around then. They went over Wig Hill Road.
Yep.
So it avoided
In which,
That's the geography.
in which how it.
And that's how Wig Hill Road became named. It was Wigwam Hill.
Last few people to speak.
So the water downtown, the problem is the rising of the water, because it was filled in. That's why we have the marsh all the way down to Morabella's. Because when they built the bridge, the culverts, right? They didn't build a bridge, they put culverts in, which is not a lot of water, so that's why we have all the marshes there. So when the water gets high and backs up, there's nothing to do. That's why, you know, people go, well, why don't you put, you know, drainage, why don't you, and I'm like, because it's the water level. You really can't pump it out, it's just, the other streams are obviously have different, you know, categories, but you really can't change what happened for Chester Center. You just know what to do. I mean, I prepared myself, so I know how to clean it up. I can beat surf pro. So, you know, I've got my own system, but, you know, that's the way it is.
All right, I think we have one more in the back here.
I'm younger than most of you all, I probably don't have to tell you, but, I live in Branford and, I'm dealing with it now. It's a cautionary tale. You should all go home, contact your insurance company, ask them to send you an update of your insurance. None of this stuff is covered. I mean, floods aren't covered, they have now like a waiver that they charge an extra 5%, or they take 5% off of the top. And, they don't cover hurricanes, they don't cover flooding. And, you think you're covered, and then when you get that letter from them, sorry, we're not paying the claim, it's pretty devastating.
Thanks.
So check, double check.
So we have lots of.
We have refreshments out back here, and you want to speak, Carrie? So thank you everybody for contributing. In a great program.